Ongi etorri Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Azkuna zentroko letren nazioarteko jaialdira. Jarraian, artean eta denboran izeneko solasaldia izango da, Valerie Miles eta Estrella de Diego idazleen artean. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a Gutun Zuria Bilbao, Festival Internacional de las Letras de Azkuna Zentroa. A continuación, tendrá lugar la conversación titulada En el arte y en el tiempo, entre las escritoras Valerie Miles y Estrella de Diego.
Bueno, yo creo que Valerie me pide que...
Valerie has asked me to start and to kick off, so thank you very much to you all for being here this evening, and congratulations to Valerie, because it has been an ordeal to come here, but I'm very happy to be here. I'm very pleased, I insist, because all the mails we have exchanged, and Valerie she told me something that made me think, and I think you have been talking about that. She just told me I'm overwhelmed, and I feel I'm an imposter, but this is more for men, but what I do is nearly everything. My part on the stage of these words and the literature is to the others to get their own awards and prizes, and I feel quite weird. This can lead us to a reflection that was addressed this morning. I wrote a book, but Valerie Miles is not here, and all this makes me think about something that that has been also addressed this afternoon. An author has been talking about the translations and the different possibilities of those minority language. The Finnish, for example, when I studied Finnish, they said, "Why do you study this language?" Because I'm here, and I really want to study it. But the idea of the translation that is closely related not only with the translation work, but also it is closely linked with your work profession, and with the idea of expanding it goes beyond translating a word after the other. We could kick up with that. Thank you very much, Estrella, for being here. You've gone through a lot in the transport means, as you have mentioned. I'm really happy to be here with Estrella. I know you for a while already. When I read your book, El Prado Invertido, and in Prado, this book was a moment for reflection, because you pushes the reader to understand a piece of art, a painting, in a different way. So I would like to thank you. And for me, I'm really grateful for this award. We are all human beings, but it's very nice to be awarded a prize. While I was talking with a friend the other day, when you receive an award for a life, for a profession, that means that I'm an adult, and it is a passion. It has been a passion for all these years, and you are a bit like me. It is, and the translations, because in these translations we do a lot. We write, we critic, but also we edit We are also curators of the many exhibitions we organize. You are an art historian, but also a thinker, but also a teacher. And so we translate a lot in our lives and works. Translation has a major role, or plays a major role. Those who we don't know a language, we can communicate with someone. But also translation is a matter of understanding a lot of things that are related to culture. And I was thinking about your project, Granta, because it is a project for whole life, and it is articulated when we understand translation as a specific form that makes us better understand the world and get closer to the world. When someone translate all the Russians, or when Pushkin's the poet is fleeing St. Petersburg, he says, "I love you, Peter City," because they cry because it is exiled. But when they have the French had to translate it, they had to appeal to the emotions of the readers and to make this work. So I don't know, maybe lost when you go from a form to the other. How do you do that? It is mediation in a way, because mediation is right, but also is publish. It is all those things we get into. Yes, yes, sure. I've been translating for many years now, from Spanish to English and from the Catalan language to English. And also I have translated from the Asturian to English. Joan Deyo is a great writer, but I've also translated from French to English. I have had the experience as a publisher, as working with many authors and many from many languages, from Spanish to English, but also from the Russian, Chinese. I've taught translation during more than 20 years in the Pompeu Fabra. I've been looking at translation from different perspectives, to be a translator, teaching translating techniques, and publishing a translation. It is quite weird, because we face many theories of translation, but each text is a new. So you have to approach it in a different way each time, because you're not only translating words, you are translating a whole mental architecture. When we translate, we are not trying to recover or recuperate this mental architecture, but we are trying to live in this architecture. We are translating a structure, because language is not only culture, it is also a way of articulating and structuring the world. So that makes the Basque language, what makes the Basque language so interesting. It is a singular language, and when I started to work with the Basque language, euskera, I learned a lot of things. How the language when it gets to Spanish, and then when it goes to English, it's going to be expanding itself. And as an editor, I wasn't aware of that. And I remember it was very interesting. Maybe because of out of curiosity, I would like to know why from the Euskera to Spanish there is an expansion as well, but when with English even more, and it's quite strange because from the Spanish to English, well, an editor knows that there is a 20% less of space when you go from Spanish to English. And I thought maybe it was because of the text or the translator. No, it was the same for all the texts. And it could be the topic of work. I have friends that speak language, the Basque language, and these are the kind of languages that are. I know that this kind of languages that they have to expand, but when we're talking about English, that is quite synthetic. And a very interesting thing, we have used the word minority language. I prefer to use the word dominant or not dominant. The dominant languages or prevailing languages enable us to communicate, but the minority languages that they force us to think about what is communicating. It is a step forward. They become very transparent because everybody knows these words. It is quite dangerous because when we see that the languages that have different structures that are structured in the world in a different way, when you talk about you in English, there is only you, but in French there is vous. For example, that is changed quite a lot for a writer, when they go from the usted to the you, to the when we do not translate these languages in this and sticking to the structure, we get to a new structure. And 2 years ago, I remember that it was something I didn't think about. A certain number of writers, Latin American writers in the National Library were talking about translations of Spanish that were standardized for the whole community to get rid of the você, for example, which is so language is, at the end of the day, power, an instrument of power. It prevails because when they talk French, it is a whole literary philosophy. So it is interesting to see how someone has to look into the mirror and to translating. It is important, and what you have just mentioned, how these languages that are special, when you have to talk English in a high, it is very complicated, but when you have to, when it is small talk, it's easier. So it is we can see that it is a very synthetic language, English, and it's complex because of that. But you have to get into a different world that is going to be a sort of mirror and also as a possibility. And we will be able to offer other ways, not only to gaze, but also to structure the world. And what you've just said about the Spanish, and to look for a neutral Spanish. One of my first positions was in MSC, what was an Argentinian publishing house, and I was representing MSC in Spain, so I had books, Borges, Silvino Campo, they published Casares and Koselinsky, and a lot of writers. And in the department of correctors, they wanted to get rid of a lot of things, to get rid of this Argentinian touch. But I was really surprised about it. I wouldn't never have thought about that. So it's just, I wasn't agreeing with the idea of standardizing a language. I wanted to promote or underscore these differences. It is when you were talking about that, it came to my mind the name of a author, Rita Indiana, which is great. She's someone in the audience that is applauding. Rita Indiana is a great author, and she, with no complexes at all, she uses a lot of expressions from the Caribbean area, and I am quite aware of these expressions in Latin America, but I don't get everything. And the idea that we talk the same language, but it's not really true, because the idea of having to translate a language that you think you know, this plurality or this diversity is a major challenge. And so when we started with this conversation, but also we opened the conversation when I started to work on the translator of other languages. Each number is just like a constellation, or it's just like each issue is a constellation. It is creating a movement, and for this movement, and here we can go to, there are many perspectives, many gazes. It is a way of looking an idea through different perspectives. Or, for example, in this latest issue dedicated to Central America, I recovered two texts that were important interviews. Malta Holmes was an American that she was a reporter. She was the only one in the beach of Normandy in the Second World War, and it was the wife of Hemingway. Hemingway wasn't on the beach at that time. Is not so surprising, but when she was 80 years old, she went to Panama during the Panama's invasion, and she was against this invasion, and she wanted to be a witness of this invasion, and she wanted to write about it. And the second one, John Tidiam, was in Salvador when, in 1982, when there was an earthquake at that time, and he spent quite a lot of time in San Salvador and wrote about the situation. And during the 80s, there were a lot of writers, journalists, and war correspondents that went to Nicaragua. This region was a region to be described and to be written about. Christopher Hitchens, that was interviewed the president there at the time, but a lot of the files that we found were translated and published in Spanish. But these two huge these features weren't translated, so we had to find these looks that were presented in these features was a different look, a different gaze, what they could think about. What is these? We might ask ourselves, it is not because of ourselves. It is very interesting because this idea about what translation can recover or recuperate, what the things that are not translated won't exist. So this is a huge responsibility. So in the text, we give the word to the other, and I think it is very important to see what is translated and what is not translated, and of all the places where women have been erased or recuperated, the translation is where this work is done in. And I think it is a question I haven't got an answer to that question. Why this work hasn't been done before? Yes, it is very interesting. I think it is because of the matter of reception, because when we get used to something, it is when you use a language, you don't really see how this language is. Because one day asked me, why did you left the States? Because I had the language that was stick to my skin, to everything, and I couldn't see anything. When you start to get rid of the mask, and you see the world in a different way, and the world changes. So I just wanted to feel this strangeness, and because with this strangeness you are going to change the world. And when in this when we were in the changing room and we were getting ready to come to the stage, I was just telling you that it's just like it is the border, the going from one place to the other. I started this year to study French, and I said I cannot change life, but I will change language. I will change my language. Laurie Anderson says that she's a performer, and she says that when she goes to Paris, she changes herself. She becomes another person. And this is just because if I have an award, it's because of something, because I am an I have some time to change, or you have some time to change roles. This is really fascinating. Something we call it's a translation, but we can also call it delocalization, outsourcing, or impossibility, because sometimes what we love about translation is that you don't really won't be able to say exactly the same. There are some words that cannot be translated, and they can be similar, but maybe sometimes to talk is to be near, to talk and to say things. I don't want to be too Lacanian, but Lacan has his thing. When you like the world of language and literature, you get trapped. It's just like vertigo in a way. I remember once I was in Montevideo with Ida Vitale, which is a Uruguayan poet, and we spoke about translation. I said at the time George Steiner has an essay that, where he says there are 4 steps of the translation. The first step is trust, the second one aggression, and it has another 2 more, restitution, and there are ways of very aggressive ways of thinking, because they have the thirst, the love, and you start with trust, aggression, restitution. And I said, what do you think about that, Ida? And I said, text is the lover, and you have to strip it. You have to undress the lover. And I said, well, she spoke about the fact that the translation is an act of love. Someone trusts, but trust in you. You do not have to have a trust as a trick or whatever. Someone trusts in you, and he's giving you his world, and you have to translate this world to somewhere else, but without losing that world and with other words. It is like a negotiation, and you have to play with the registers.
Entrar a ese mundo, pero sí, es un amante.
Yes, you're right. This is a lover. You have to delve into their world. You have to take the freedom and then give it away. And I think this is such a fantastic idea that maybe people think it's something that just happens, but actually these women in this idea of recovering women for history and for genealogy, I like looking at female genealogies as well. Maybe it's not only these women, but also they need to be translated as well. So for me, this is really interesting in this context. However, when I look at a picture, a painting, I'm also translating. We always translate. Actually, translation isn't a modus operandi, but it's a modus vivendi. I love this idea of a text being a lover that needs to be seduced. I think it's great because a text is a very delicate thing, a very intimate thing. And the number of times you think about how to express yourself in a text and you can't find exactly the same thing that you want to say, and you're never going to find it, and you have to sort of get off your chair and go out and for a walk. I like when you talk about looking at paintings and describing paintings, and the fact that all texts and all the paratexts that you have to write explaining what a painting's about. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. It's because that's part of your experience. However, I'm going to read to introduce this conversation another translation. This is going to be another kind of language here. And we were talking about this earlier, about the exhibition organized by Ivan de la Nuez. Inois Irreala. What it means is never real, always truthful. It's an exhibition that's here. I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the catalogue. It's a fantastic catalogue, and as we know, catalogues are not easy to create. And as we're talking about art and time, I want to show here and now how for me this catalogue is so important, because it's a field that I'm working on a great deal. And as I said this morning, and I would like to repeat this, the time for good books is infinite. Good books are infinite. Don't think that a book, if it's not sold in the first 3 weeks of its life, is never going to sell. That's not true. Once something that exists, it exists, and it will be lasting over time. And maybe the exhibition is no longer here, and this is an absence we could perhaps talk about. However, there's a witness that stays behind, and it's the catalogue. The first paragraph of an essay by Ivan de la Nuez. Never real, but always truthful. It's something that Artaud wrote on a picture. It's just a line which explains the symbiosis between art and literature, a standard for artists that take literature as a genre, or the other way round. We can also read it as a criticism of the status quo, of those systems that govern both of these worlds, and how they are treated as just closed areas. When we were talking beforehand, and you've gone back to this, we think that actually now everything is exhibited, everything is exhibition, but that's actually something that's very new. If I didn't have a catalogue of the 1930s, I wouldn't actually know what had happened during exhibition, because I wasn't there. So this idea of how something is going to happen, not because things are eternal, but because they are necessary. And this idea that you had, I'd never thought about so clearly the way that you say, which is that without catalogues we wouldn't have art history. Now we've got reproductions, we've got videos, but actually I organised an exhibition about women in the 19th century, and I didn't have any reproductions. I couldn't find the paintings. It was like a thesis on some catalogues where there were some women who I used to explain based on my idea that these were professional women because their work had reached an exhibition. So I used the title to sort of sketch out what I thought they could be painting. And now my students cannot understand that a performance is not recorded on video, but for many, many years, and maybe there were the odd photos of a performance, and the only thing that's left of what happened at the exhibition is a catalogue. And I think this is a challenge, because a catalogue just is a collection of words. For example, great transatlantic journeys. The only thing that we have is a report, the diary of that journey, what people have written. And I think this This is really important, and it's related to what you just read. You were also talking about how a catalogue shows the work of the person who's curating an exhibition and what that person chooses. And that person selects things. It's personal to the curator, the way they see the paintings and the way they bring paintings or pictures together and set them out. They want to show something through the way they curate the exhibition. There, you've also got the work of the way that person sees things and what they choose, what they select for the exhibition. As Ivan said earlier, in my generation, we learnt how to organize exhibitions by working with people that already knew how to organize exhibitions. That's not a bad way of learning. Maybe you don't need to do that with translation. But for me, an exhibition is like a book, almost. Yeah, it's almost like a book. It's a book. Yeah, it's a book. Not like a book. It's a book. Because what you're doing is you're telling a tale using images. And the same when you're writing a book, you suddenly can't think how to continue, or you're never going to be able to write something as good as what you've just written ever again. The same happens when you're organizing an exhibition. So this idea that it's a book, but a book in which you may have a problem and you need somebody who's sufficient, generous to allow you to use their work in the exhibition, because if they don't loan you the exhibit that you want for your exhibition, you've got to start the organization of the exhibition again, all over. But in this play between curatorship and mediation, you, at the end of the day, are actually playing with loaded cards, with marked cards. What you're trying to do is to get the audience to see the combination that you've made. So, and that makes different works have different meanings. Something that you can't do with translation, or maybe you can, because otherwise maybe it wouldn't work properly if that was lacking. There's an issue of Granta, and the grant isn't just a collection of texts that are just put in a journal. For example, if we choose the latest new narrators, we don't just choose them because in alphabetical order or because they come from a certain year in which they're all born in the same year. No, it's how they converse with each other. When you're at an exhibition, it's not the same. There's a route around that exhibition, and the way you see and the order in which you see the pictures is important, and it can give you a different experience if they're in a different order. Sometimes when we talk about time and art, and that's our subject today, we say that one of the major differences between art and literature is time, basically, because literature or writing is sequential in nature, whereas painting is simultaneous. But what I've always been fascinated about when I've read your book, The Unseen Prado, and other works that you've written, is how you refute the idea that a picture is both frozen in time and simultaneous. No, it's not. It's not. No, it's not. Last summer, I reread Cámara y Lucidad, which is a book that highlighted so many times, and I suddenly realized I'd missed something. And I saw it after my mother had died. So books are living beings, and the same goes for pictures. The way you see a picture can be different when you come back to it. The same goes for books as well. It's like when you go and see another person, and that person, you go back and see them again, and maybe you're no longer interested in them. That just depends on how you look at things. John Berger says that clearly and explains it, the idea of the need to revisit, review things. And this idea that books will only last for 3 weeks and it only has 3 weeks to become popular. No, that's not true. You just need to reread things. If you're reading an issue of Grant, which is, of course, curated, you read it, but that you don't necessarily read in the order in which they've been written. It's like when a person goes to an exhibition, they have their own route they want to take, and these associations you get in the issue of Granta, the same thing happens. And so as you leave the exhibition, maybe you've made an exhibition. In fact, the recent issue on Central America, this is clearly a complicated place, especially now. Central America is going through violent times with extreme political situations, but actually they've spent many years like that. And I didn't want to hide that fact, but I didn't want it to be the only thing. I also wanted to talk about the small victories in these places. There are some fantastic writers there that aren't very well known, and with the additional difficulty of trying to emerge from these places, because there are places where there aren't even bookshops, for example. But I wanted to approach this from a distance. We would start by breathing and then move forward to El Salvador, for example, where there are areas that suffer from very violence. So in the introduction for the reader, I wrote, there's a path that you choose, but you can actually join or leave that path whenever you want. Of course, at your own risk. Because if you go directly, sometimes it can be very risky, and there's great intensity in the way you read. There's also something about memory that you talk about, in that a picture isn't always the same picture that you saw the day before or the year before. And El Prado is a place that you know very well. But you may go in the summer or in the winter or on a rainy day or a sunny day. When you come back and see the same picture again, you see it differently. But that happens with books as well. For me, voluntary or involuntary memory is something that's fascinating, because they can trigger things and you don't know what they've triggered. It's like something happens and this something takes you to another life, to a house. So this idea of memory and the tricks that memory plays on us, you know, the typical book that you think you know inside out. And you return to the book and all of a sudden it's like, oh, yes. You're trying to remember. The same with a painting. You're trying to remember a painting that you know really well, or a book that you know very well, or a house that you know very well. And things change. Of course, they change the way you look at things when you're a child, but through your whole life, things change. Our memory is fascinating because our memory can surprise us, it can shock us, it plays with us, our memory, and it's great. It's like a continual transformation of reality. And a translation, of course. Your memory translates continually. You think that what used to be a huge staircase is actually just 4 steps. And places that you return to, that you knew when you were a child, and when you return there, you see it's tiny. I remember it was huge or different. So translation there plays a part of memory as well. And it plays tricks on us. Our memory plays tricks on us. Do we have a little bit of time still? We'll then ask the audience if they want to ask some questions. But very quickly, maybe you can talk about a painting. Because I want to talk about something that happened to me when I was reading. And it's the novel Madame Bovary. I read Madame Bovary when I was very young. And I really don't understand half of what I was reading. But it became a sort of a book that was key in my life. Because it was the first time that I felt that everybody said, because people used to say, reading can be a dangerous sport. And I suddenly realized, yes, it's dangerous. This woman who wants to leave the backward provinces, who wants to have a different life. She wants to love out of love's sake. She doesn't want this boring life. She's seeking something more in her life. And I understood it and I thought, oh, of course, yes, that's a dangerous, that's planting the seeds of ideas in your head and what could happen in the future. And it wasn't until a lot later when I was talking to somebody and they were saying, what are you talking about? Madame Bovary is a lady that reads bad books and she has an awful life and she commits suicide. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, you can't say that. You can't say that about Madame Bovary. No. And I reread it. And I still thought the same. I still have the same opinion about the book. But it's funny how the things that we read, the pictures that we see, we take ownership of them. And it may well be we're completely wrong. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the way we see them. It's the way we read them. Yang Xu, who's a great writer and philosopher who I admire, she's an extraordinary woman. She's very delicate. She's a fantastic intellectual as well. She talks about texts and images and the idea of going to a museum and asking questions of a museum and then using this play between what you say and what you see, what you ask, and whether you see what you say or not. So she goes to the museum and she says, well, let's talk. And she always talks about the semi-drowned dog by Goya. And she said, oh, I own that work. This idea that it doesn't belong to anybody else. She wasn't trying to be colonizing. She wasn't trying to settle there. And she said, oh, no, it's somebody else's work. But everybody has this same work, but this is hers. And actually, this is this idea that when you're reading something or looking at something, you're interpreting something completely different. The same goes with languages. There are languages that you are happy in than others. And I chose French, and I found in English the language of my life. But nobody in my house took any notice of me, and I had to carry on studying in French. So I started buying the books by D.H. Lawrence, and I started reading them because I knew they were dangerous books. And so I started reading words such as penniless. And this first meeting with D.H. Lawrence, and at the end of the day, it's not easy to read D.H. Lawrence in English. I remember the time when I started reading the short stories of D.H. Lawrence, and I remember, oh, whoa, these are really, really dangerous things. So when I was at home and people saw that I was, really enthusiastic about reading things I couldn't really understand, they thought, okay, maybe we should let her study English. That's very intelligent. I mean, by your parents. They were very intelligent. But you've survived. I needed to change language. Yes, we're nearly coming to the end of our conversation. But we're open for any questions from the audience. But you're going to have to turn the lights on, otherwise I can't see them. Or I can't actually see who's out there. Are there any questions from the floor?
Bueno, cuestión o comentario.
Or comment, or translation, or reading.
¿Quién es el o la apasionada de Rita Indiana?
Who is the person that loves Rita and Diana? Do you want to say something? Yeah, because you're here. Do you want to say something about that? Your passion for Rita and Diana? You need to explain why, perhaps, if you want to. It's just when nobody asks any questions, then people that are talking get all upset. What's Rita for you? What does she mean to you? Just so that I'm thinking as a publisher, for me, it was a discovery. Her books have been published in Periférica. She is an exceptional novelist because what she does is destroy the presuppositions of her own tradition. You'd think, because of her age and the way she writes, that novels such as Saturno and her recent novel called Asmodeo, which is brilliant, she comes from a Latin American tradition, which is mainly dominated by male writers, and she changes that. She's a very original writer. She plays with language. And I think because she's playful, and she was a musician for many years, in fact, she still is, and Asmodeo, just to encourage you to read it, is a novel which talks about a devil that possesses a person and then tries to seek out other people to possess, because the one that he's possessed is very old and, has to find somebody else to possess. So Rita and Diana, she's great. I remember the first book that I ever read was Mucama de Mulomley, and I started reading it in Buenos Aires airport. What was the book about? I don't know. You can't underline. And then I'm trying to encourage you to read. She plays on cameos. A character that was present 3 novels previously reappears. She's an extraordinary writer, and I think she should be given many, many prizes. And as I'm a mad fan of her, I was invited by Rodrigo Marcos to present one of her books. And I was like, sort of like gobsmacked. I couldn't believe that I was actually in close proximity to Rita Indiana. She's a great writer, absolutely fantastic. I'm over here. Sorry, I apologize with the light. It's difficult to see. Literature and art sustains time and sustains us as well. But I wanted to ask a question. You translate both art and words. I think it's very difficult to translate poetry. When you spoke about Ida Vitale, because poetry doesn't just have words, there's the rhythm of the poem, there's the silences of the poem. I don't read poetry in other languages because I can't. I find it difficult. How do you deal with that? I fully agree with you. For many years, I've been working on a book, translating a poetry book. It's not only that it's difficult to translate poetry, and actually, you can't really translate poetry. You need to rewrite it. It's meaningless to translate a line of poetry word by word. You need to respect the text, of course. You need to take a step back and rewrite. That reminds me of something that Gabriel García Márquez said about his translator, Gregory Rabassa. And he said, oh, Gregory reads the whole book, then he puts it to one side, and then he rewrites it. And I like that. And that's how things should be done, quite clearly.
Muy altamente poética.
This prose that is poetical and requires this kind of work, I guess. So this poetry I'm translating is quite distant in time. It is a Peruvian poet from 1790, and he died in 1915, very young. He was executed by the Spanish, and he is coming from quite a distance in time, and it is very difficult to translate many of the words that are not used anymore. We like owner, prenda, dueño, these very old words, and do it. Mariano Melgar it's his name. He wrote a lot of yaravíes, what we call, these are poems, the yaravíes. They are poems that are written with a certain rhythm in the indigenous people, the Quechua, above all. So it is even more difficult, it is even more far away. How can you guess the sounds of the Quechua at that time and how they are part of his poetry? We could say it is not translatable. It cannot be translated, but as you have rightly said, difficulty is challenging, and it is the great joy when you say, yes, now I can see the poem, because you can translate, and sometimes it's just like frozen, something that is not lively, but poetry, you feel it when it is, the meaning is coming out of the poem. Sometimes you have to translate, or you have to decide whether what you are looking for is the effect of this poem, and sometimes you have to be negotiating the meaning of the first line or verse has to go to the second verse, for example, no one can pay you the time dedicated and devoted to that. But the poetry is a really outstanding. The fact of reading a poem and also of reaching this moment of joy that you can get when you read a poem. It is when you feel this, it is a great joy. It is really, for me, it is unthinkable that you cannot translate something, a text. I think you can. You have to be able to do that when, if just suddenly, I think Benyat was talking about the poems and the translations. I have to read poems. I cannot read Russian, but I would like to read the translation. There is, for example, Mónica and Olvido Barceles. It was a translation done by Círculo that Tayeva and Akhmatova were translated. And you like younger because you don't read German. It has been really well translated into English. If you had to read it in German, you wouldn't read it. So, but these desperate rhythm, in the case of Matova, for example, she says, are you going to be able to narrate this? And this lady said, well, I can, yes. I think that you can get close to the text, and what you have to do is to work with someone that knows the language, that it has to be its mother tongue, of course, and that person can explain to you what happens, and then you can talk about it in your language. But I wouldn't be able to read a lot of text if it would be not translatable or not translated. So it is, I think that it is a great challenge, but it has to be translated. We have to seek the ways of doing it, as you have rightly mentioned, Valerie. Yes. It is possible. Just imagine without living with Dayeva, Armatova. I wouldn't have read those books if you haven't read something. You don't really miss it. So. But everything can be translated. And maybe paintings or pictures or other languages can be translated. Yes. Okay. I think we are going to call it a day. I could stay here for many longer, but of course, we have to leave it here. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Y de verdad, muchas gracias. No, gracias a ti, Valerie, por favor. Muchas gracias también al festival.
Thank you also to Gutun Zuria, and thank you for the award. Thank you.
Bueno, hasta luego.